It's Sunday morning, rain is falling. Tears of shadows in my hands. Back and forth we sway like branches, unforgettable. We know about the moment we're in. Things get hard and crazy, living life is hard to do. I'd rather sit in bed and waste the day with you. No, there's nothing else that I would rather do, yeah. There's nothing else that I would rather do. And this is all I need. In darkness, this is all I see. Come and rest your bones with me. Driving slow on Sunday morning, we will never want to leave. Oh, yeah, yeah. Paint a picture with your fingers. See my shadow in your eyes. Sit and describe me in ways unforgettable. I twist your foot the more than we are in. And things may be so crazy, living life is hard to do. But I know if I go home, I'll get to spend the day with you. Yeah, there's nothing in my world I'd rather do. Yeah, there's nothing in my world I'd rather do. And this is all I need. And darkness, she is all come and rest your bones with me. Driving slow on a Sunday morning, and I never want to leave. Ooh, nah, yeah. And this is all I need. In darkness, she is all I see. Come and rest your bones with me. Driving slow on Sunday morning, and I never want to leave. Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting when the evening comes, watching the ships roll in, and I'll watch them roll away again. I'm sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. Oh, no, no. Sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time. Left my home in Georgia, headed for Frisco Bay. I got nothing to live for, nothing gonna come my way. Oh no, sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. No, 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 sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time. Feels like nothing's gonna change. Oh, oh, oh. Everything still remains the same. Yeah. I can't do what some people tell me to do, so I guess I'll remain the same. Sitting here resting my bones, but this loneliness won't leave me alone. Yeah, 2,000 miles I roam just to make this dock my home. I'm sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. Oh no, no, sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time, time. You told me secret things, made my heart envision diamond wings. You asked me if it scared me what I felt so quick. Your questions are deep, but baby you're it. And so many firsts. You brought back my music. You saw through my ballin'. You saw through the show. So baby, whenever you're ready for steady, come over, come get me, we'll go. Wherever you roam, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready. You tower over me, but only physically. Our personalities are quite compatible at our sabbatical just south of the States. We planned our escape. We walked in black sand. Your tongue feels my holding hand. You love me so kindly, and with you I'm home. So baby, whenever you're ready for steady, come over, come get me, we'll go. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Wherever you roam, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. Oh, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I'm ready. You know I'm a wanderer. Daily I grow fonder of the love we give. I haven't seen any adventure I need, I'll just take you with. My body eases with your temperament. I won't take it for granted, though I don't understand it. You keep me safe, I'll keep you wild. Do anything to make you smile. In Costa Rica, in Costa Rica, I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready to go. Two jumps in a week, I bet you think that's pretty clever, don't you, boy? Flying on your motorcycle, watching all the ground beneath you drop. You kill yourself for recognition. You do it all to never, ever stop. Oh, you broke another mirror and you turn it into something you are not. Don't leave me high. Don't leave me dry. Don't leave me high. Don't leave me dry. drying up in conversation. You will be the one who cannot talk. When all your insides fall to pieces, you just sit there wishing you could still make love. Oh, and they're the ones that hate you when you think you've got the world all sussed out. Oh, yeah. And they're the ones who spit at you, and you will be the one screaming out. Don't leave me high. Don't leave me dry. Don't leave me high. Don't leave me dry.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Everybody, welcome to today's webinar. You are at the Mindset webinar for successful EWM implementation. We are just going to be switching over to our presentation and to Stephanie sharing. Mindset actually uses Prefunq to open all of our webinars and roundtables. If this is your first Mindset webinar, first Mindset roundtable, we love offering an infusion of music to break the ice while also offering critical support to performing artists emerge out of the pandemic. Today's artist was singer Kellie Rose, and you can learn more about Kellie at kellierose.com or at prefunq.com. For moving into today's presentation, welcome to, again, Mindset's webinar on top 10 tips for successful EWM implementation. Today's presenter is EWM and ECC expert Stephanie Weiss. Stephanie is a senior solutions architect at Mindset with more than 20 years of SAP experience managing and implementing implementation and integration of SAP supply chain and logistics solutions. We're super excited for this session. Please be sure during the session to enter questions during the Q&A box or the chat box, and Stephanie will be answering those at the end of the session. But without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Stephanie.
Amy, can you see my screen?
Yes, it looks perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining Mindset's EWM webinar. As Amy mentioned, my name is Stephanie Weiss, and I am currently a solution architect at Mindset Consulting. I also run our EWM practice. I've been in the SAP world for a little over 20 years, all of which really has been focused on the supply chain, warehouse, and logistics space. Today, I'll be presenting my top 10 tips for a successful EWM implementation. Like Amy mentioned, if you have any questions or specific questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, or we can, easily set up some time to chat one-on-one after this meeting at a later date. So I have a lot to cover today, so I'm just going to give a quick brief intro into Mindset for those of you who are not familiar with us. So Mindset is headquartered in Minneapolis, and we have offices both in Denver and India. I'm based out of the Denver office. We are an SAP partner, and our primary focus is SAP. So Mindset got its start doing UX UI design for our customers that wanted to kind of leverage exceptional user experience on the SAP platform. In the past 10 years, we've grown exponentially. And now we offer everything from strategy and design services to full SAP implementations and beyond. So we'll start off with my top 10 tips. And tip number 1 is building that business case. So I think the cornerstone to a successful implementation really starts with one question: why am I doing this? So an EWM implementation impacts more than just your warehouse. It's going to impact multiple levels and areas of your organization. So it's really crucial that as you get started, that you're able to answer this basic question to build that business case for EWM. And building that business case primary goal is to ensure that stakeholder buy-in and support. Otherwise, you'll be fighting an uphill battle all the way. So, to answer that question, why am I doing this? What is your rationale or justification for implementing a new WMS solution? Is it because your current solution lacks the functionality to support future growth and expansion? Is your system highly customized, and is it getting harder and more expensive to maintain as the years go by? Or is your existing WMS system approaching the end of life? Or potentially, is it because you're migrating to S4, which presents a great opportunity for change? So as you ask yourself, why am I doing this? If I'm going to spend all this time and money, why SAP EWM? Why not another WMS solution like Manhattan or Blue Yonder? Why am I doing this? What are those benefits for that you're going to get or see out of EWM? And what does success look like? So these are the key kind of questions to building a strong business case for EWM. So being able to answer these is the key. So although, EWM has kind of evolved into a best of breed WMS solution, part of building that business case for EWM might actually require you to kind of do your due diligence and evaluate other comparable solutions, whether that's like Manhattan, Blue Yonder, Corber. The first step in evaluating, different software is to kind of define what that evaluation criteria is. So you can consider things like core functionality, what's the, functionality for receiving and put away, cross-docking, slotting, those kind of things. Other criteria include things like total cost of ownership. So, not only what is it going to cost to implement, what are my one-time costs for like infrastructure and hardware? What are my ongoing operating costs going to be? And then lastly, what does that MPV and IRR look like? How long will it take for me to see that ROI? A couple of the other, evaluation criteria, which is very common, is, extensibility and sustainability, risk, and then obviously vendor performance. So, these are kind of the most common evaluation criteria that I've seen or I've used in the past, but there definitely may be other categories that you want to consider that aren't listed here. Once you've kind of identified that benchmark, you can then determine how each of the different solutions rank against each of those evaluation criteria. So once you've defined what that evaluation criteria are, the next step is to decide how each category will be weighed. So in my experience, capabilities, so core the functionality of the system, and the total cost of ownership are usually identified as kind of the two most important categories, and are usually weighted at a much higher percentage. But that's something for you to define what is the most important criteria for you when doing that evaluation. We're going to pause right here for one moment, and we have an actual poll question. So I'm going to bring up our poll. So if you wouldn't mind, the first poll question is, what WMS solution are you currently using today? So are you using ECC WM, a third party? Are you currently on S4 with WM? Or are you using embedded or decentralized EWM? We'll give you a few moments to answer that question. Great, thank you everybody for answering that question. So it looks like it's kind of all across the board. We've got people using all different types of solutions currently. We've got somebody using ECC-WM. We've got a couple people already on the S4 system using WM or embedded or decentralized EWM. Thank you everybody for participating in that poll. So we'll continue on. So the third kind of key element to building that business case is to identify the benefits of EWM, whether they are qualitative or quantitative. To give you kind of a few examples of benefits at a functional level, in EWM, you can use activity areas and bin sequencing to support Z picking or U picking, which you can't do in standard WM. This, being able to kind of support different pick paths helps reduce travel time and increase picking efficiencies within your warehouse. Another example is, if you're using standard ECC WM, the kitting process in the warehouse is, there is no standard out of the box functionality. And so typically kitting is a very manual intensive process in the warehouse. In EWM, standard MTO, MTS, so make to order, make to stock functionality is available, which helps eliminate those manual processes, thereby reducing labor costs and increasing efficiencies within the warehouse. So being able to kind of identify all of those benefits you're going to get from a functional perspective, but there's also these other tangible benefits that you can attribute to EWM as a whole, such as, you're going to see increased productivity rates, increased inventory accuracy. A lot of times with EWM, you have the elimination of kind of external systems and interfaces. You have a lot tighter integration with TRM and plant maintenance and manufacturing. And then, with EWM, you just have that improved visibility and so forth. So the kind of the final key element of building that business case for EWM is to define, what success looks like. Keep in mind, success is going to look very, very different for each company, but being able to define, how are we going to measure success? How are we going to know if EWM is providing us those benefits that we initially said it was going to be? So, being able to kind of define them and say how you're going to measure them. And so setting some goals, does success mean having a global template and a repeatable process that can be used to roll out the solution globally within 3 years? Does success for you mean reducing monthly operating costs by 20% or improving on-time shipments to 95%? So being able to define that and saying how you're going to measure is another, key element to building a strong business case for EWM. So tip number 2 for a successful implementation is take the time to build a roadmap for implementation. So, building a detailed roadmap should include, your strategy for deployment, implementation, system migration, and data migration. So we're going to kind of dive a little bit into what each of those look like. So the key to developing a deployment strategy is first understanding your options in S4. So initially SAP announced that standard LEWM would be available in S4 on-prem only, but would eventually be phased out and no longer available after 2025. However, SAP received a lot of pushback from their existing install base and eventually announced a few summers ago in June of 2019, a new offering which they've called stockroom management. So stockroom management is essentially what we know today as LEWM, It's just been rebranded. But without that TRM, value-added services, yard management, or wave management capabilities or integrations. So stockroom management is really ideal for kind of those low complexity warehouses that wouldn't necessarily benefit from all of the added functionality and complexity of EWM. So moving forward, so in S4, stockroom management is still a very viable solution. Then you also have embedded EWM, which is essentially has two flavors, right? So with EWM or embedded EWM, you have basic and advanced. Basic EWM offers a lot of the enhanced functionality or new functionality. For example, with replenishment, you can now define multiple fixed bins to a material. With basic EWM, you can define different put away or pick paths to support your different picking methodologies like Z picking and U picking and so forth. With advanced EWM, you get a lot more functionality such as wave management, value-added services, kitting. So that's MTO, MTS. You get slotting and rearrangement, and you get a lot more, a lot tighter integration with your manufacturing systems. So with S4, you kind of have multiple different options. You have stockroom, you have basic embedded EWM, advanced EWM, and then you still also have decentralized EWM. The one thing to note is that stockroom management and basic EWM are included in the S/4HANA 1909 Enterprise Management License. However, advanced EWM and decentralized EWM does require additional licensing costs. So once you have a better understanding of the functionality of each of your WMS options, the next step when defining that deployment strategy is to determine what is the right solution to best fit your current and any future growth or business requirements that you may have. The nice thing about S4 is that you have that ability and flexibility to have different deployment strategies for different warehouses or plants within your organization all at the same time. So, you know, for example, if we look at the map here, you know, you could have a DC sitting in Phoenix or Irving, Texas, and it's a large DC with high volume and a lot of complex business processes. So you've got a lot of kitting operations, or you're doing some value-added service operations, you've got cross-docking and so forth. That would be an ideal candidate for advanced EWM. If you look at Charlotte, North Carolina, it might be another large high volume warehouse, but it has really simple business processes. So take, for example, it's just really, you know, you're dealing with a lot of just full pallet quantities. You receive in full pallet, you're shipping in full pallet or potentially cases. You don't have any of these additional, you know, warehouse processes. And so basic EWM might be a very viable solution because you don't necessarily need wave management or value-added services or kitting or any of that kind of stuff. You also could have, you know, your Denver or Chicago location here. They might be more of a small warehouse or a really medium-sized warehouse with very, very simple processes. You know, stockroom management might be a viable option too. So one thing to keep in mind, you know, the point here is that, you know, you can have multiple solutions within your environment. It's not a one size fits all. So you don't necessarily have to deploy advanced EWM or a decentralized EWM system throughout your whole landscape. You can pick and choose and, you know, pick the right solution, pick the solution that fits you the best. So I'm sure you've heard that saying, you have to crawl before you can walk, and you have to walk before you can run. In my opinion, this philosophy should be the kind of the guiding principle when you're planning and implementing EWM. Like I've mentioned before, EWM is an incredibly robust solution that offers a lot of advanced functionality, but not everything is needed or business critical on day one. So kind of to help minimize the risk and increase like user adoption, I think that EWM functionality should be rolled out in kind of like a phased approach. So phase one should really include the functionality required to, efficiently and effectively run your warehouse. The idea here is to kind of start small and get some early wins before, implementing a lot of the more complex functionalities that you have within EWM. And then as your system kind of stabilizes and users get acclimated to the new environment and the transactions and the business processes, it's then at that point, it's a lot easier to kind of roll out that additional functionality and future enhancements. So the idea here is, start small, get some early wins, and then deploy some of those more complex and advanced features. So the last kind of key component we'll talk about when building out that roadmap is really to decide, to define what that system migration is going to look like. So really is, how are you going to get from point A to point B, whether that's going from standard LEWM or decentralized EWM or a third-party warehousing system to S/4HANA. And depending kind of on what your solution looks like and what that deployment and implementation looks like is going to really dictate what that system migration is going to look like. But typically, if you're running ECC-WM, there is a compatibility pack that allows you to take your existing warehouse structure and migrate it from ECC into S/4HANA. So basically, you can continue to run your existing warehouse with no changes in the S/4HANA world. That allows you more time to kind of plan and slowly migrate to EWM if that's the roadmap for you. So when going from kind of that basic WM or stockroom management to EWM, there's a couple of different different roads you can take. You can convert your existing warehouse into kind of like a basic EWM. You can go to advanced EWM, or you can actually do a greenfield EWM implementation. If you're going to migrate your existing warehouse, SAP does provide some technical migration tools that you can use to migrate those existing objects from LEWM to EWM. Keep in mind, though, that the additional kind of like EWM specific functionality does require configuration. And then lastly, you can do, if you want to do a greenfield implementation, that is an option too. And you would just do kind of like an SLOC to SLOC data migration from your existing WM into your EWM. And lastly, you can do this, you can just migrate if you're currently using decentralized EWM and ECC, you can migrate that into your S4 environment. So tip number 3 is to consider an EWM pilot project. So hypothetical question for everybody. Oh, actually, I'm going to pause here and we're going to do another poll question. And we're going to, oh, actually, sorry, we are not. So hypothetical, tip number 3, consider an EWM pilot project. Hypothetical question for you. Would you ever buy a car without test driving it first? I think for most of us, that answer would probably be no. So think of an EWM POC or pilot project as kind of like that test drive, right? It's a great way to demonstrate the functionality and capabilities of EWM, and it really provides like kind of valuable insight to evaluating the fit. It also allows your stakeholders to kind of help visualize that solution and kind of help gain support for EWM. Any EWM pilot project can ultimately then be rolled out into production and kind of be that baseline for any future, for that building out a global template and for any future rollouts. Tip 4 is avoid lift and shift. So during an EWM implementation, there's going to be lots of changes. And it's the kind of like the natural tendency is to kind of replicate your old processes in the new tool, ultimately that leads to the same problems that you had in your previous system. So tip 4 is avoid that lift and shift. So when implementing EWM, take that approach as that an EWM implementation is kind of like a rebirth, or it's a clean slate. Take the opportunity to really look at your current business processes and your pain points and really identify those opportunities or areas for improvement, whether they be re-engineering or streamlining your business processes, introducing new functionality, or automation into the warehouse. So take this as an opportunity to kind of reimagine what that solution is going to look like. Like I mentioned before, SAP EWM is truly a robust solution that offers a lot of advanced warehouse functionality. And with that said, standard EWM should really be able to meet most of your business needs. If during your standard to fit, which is like your fit gap analysis, if you identify any major gaps, I would highly recommend that you check with your implementation partner or even with SAP to see if there are any alternative solutions, or potentially if there's any future releases that may have functionality that you can leverage. So unless it's deemed mission critical, I would avoid custom development as much as possible, right? So tip 5, use standard functionality as much as you can. One key consideration here is that when you are selecting your implementation partner, or you're building out your EWM team, make sure that your team not only has that right level of EWM expertise, but also has a lot of real world warehouse and business experience. Because I think, knowing EWM functionality, but having that real world experience and bringing those two skill sets together is crucial for having a successful implementation also. Tip 6, empathize, walk the warehouse, take the time to really listen. I can't tell you how many times I've been on the warehouse floor for a tour and someone from the management team or IT starts to explain a process, but then the warehouse operator kind of interjects and says, oh, no, that's not really how we do it. That's how the system wants us to do it. But in reality, we do it this way because it's easier or more efficient, or the way the system was designed doesn't really work for us and doesn't really support our actual business process on the floor. So make sure that you engage your SMEs and your power users early and often to ensure that your design and that whatever you're designing and building really fits the business processes, that it really solves those major pain points and really sets up a system that enables you to grow. Otherwise, you're just going to end up having to otherwise the warehouse is going to, resort to workarounds, and they're going to, find their own way of doing things, or they're not really going to use the system. So they're not going to really, fully realize the full potential or benefits of EWM. Avoid buyer's remorse. So, sometimes as you're going through and you're designing, everybody's agreeing kind of on the design, but as you kind of start, once you start the implementations and the SMEs and the power users really start using it, they find that what was designed or agreed upon isn't necessarily what they expected, or potentially maybe another design that you had proposed initially was better. So, highly recommend adopting kind of like that hybrid agile implementation approach, where you kind of have these iterative designs and prototypes, which allows those SMEs and the power users to see the system, to touch and feel, and then also be able to provide that feedback and that solution validation, ultimately hoping to avoid that kind of buyer's remorse. Really, at the end of the day, if your SMEs and your power users don't feel like they own or have been part of the solution, you're going to, if they feel like they own and are part of that solution, they're going to ultimately be your, your biggest champions and your biggest advocate for process adoption and change management. And with any EWM implementation, there's going to be a lot of change management. So, engaging those SMEs and those power users are going to be, and making sure that they feel like they're they own the solution. They're just going to be your biggest advocates and champions for change management. Tip number 7, training is a continuous process. So can't stress this enough, is that training is not going to be a quote unquote one-time event. It's going to need to be an ongoing process, for months leading up and days and months after the actual implementation. So make sure that as part of your project plan that you do have the resources and the time allocated to really build out a well thought out training program with specific goals and target levels, and that you really take the time to build out a training toolbox, whether that is job aids with simple process flows, quick reference guides, pocket guides, troubleshooting guides, having weekly lunch and learns to keep that, to make sure that training is definitely a continuous process. One of the things that I've always found to be really, really helpful in any SAP implementation are having these quick reference and pocket guides, that you can, because there's going to be a lot of change management involved, and being able to have these quick guides is really helpful. In these guides, having a high level process flow, having like key process changes, highlighting, providing a quick reference for T codes, being able to answer some key process questions and stuff like that is, I think, really, really helpful, and is one of kind of like just an example of what can you put in your toolbox. Tip number 8, testing is like chocolate. You can't ever have enough. I can't stress this enough. Don't underestimate the time or the resources required for testing. Make sure you're testing your day in the life scenarios, you're testing with realistic data and volumes. Don't always test the happy path, right? Make sure you're including reversals, stock out situations, those one-off type things, because that's really where you're going to kind of break the system. And also make sure you engage your SMEs, your power users, and your COE during testing, right? Because they're going to be the ones on the floor supporting you as you go, as you move forward and go through implementation. Tip 9, automate, automate, automate. So automate as much as possible. Automation in the warehouse can mean many different things. Automation can be as simple as using standard functionality to automate wave picking or the printing of shipping documentation, or automation can be as complicated as integrating an ASRS system into EWM. Whatever the case, automation can be very, very useful in mitigating the complexities of EWM, and it can really help replace that tribal knowledge of the system. Ultimately, more automation means less manual intervention, which subsequently leads to less errors and better accuracy, increased productivity, and so forth. With that said, having a robust yet intuitive RF mobile solution is key to a successful implementation. So if you don't have a lot of time and money for automation, the one thing I would definitely recommend is, really take the time to invest in a RF mobile solution. In my experience, one of the biggest pain points or complaints that I hear in the warehouse is my RF transactions are clunky and they really don't fit what I'm doing on the shop floor. So out of the box, EWM comes with numerous standard quote unquote out of the box RF transactions. However, these, keep in mind, these were designed for the masses. So it's one bin-to-bin transaction that's supposed to support all kind of businesses, regardless of industry or size or whatever. So you really should take the time to really evaluate and test the out of the box transactions for process fit. Do they really fit your business processes? So some key considerations as you evaluate those out of the box transactions is, one, do my RF transactions facilitate the operational steps within the warehouse, not the systematic steps required in SAP? So to give you an example, if anybody's worked with handle unit managements, whether it's in EWM or standard WM, you typically have to unpack or repack or split an HU. You have to take your HU and you have to do a bin-to-bin transfer to your quote unquote repacking storage type in bin. At that point, you can unpack, repack, create your new one, and then you have to do another bin-to-bin transaction from that repack storage type in bin back to your original bin. This is the biggest complaint I've heard in the warehouses. Well, I actually physically don't move my my pallet. I'm just taking 2 of them off and putting them on a different pallet. Why do I need to do a bin-to-bin transaction? Very good question. So, you know, with standard RF, there are 2 or 3 transactions that you would actually have to execute in the RF to be able to do that to be able to do that business process, where in reality, it's one business on the shop floor, it's one business process or one step, but in the system, it requires 3 separate SAP transactions. So to kind of help mitigate that, you know, you want your RF transactions to reflect what you're actually doing on the floor. So this kind of goes into point 2 here, is that RF transactions should be multi-threaded. So basically, all the necessary GUI transactions should be executed in the background. So in that example with the HU, unpack, repack, I should be able to scan my source HU, scan my material, tell them how many boxes or what the quantity I'm pulling off, scan my next HU, and I should be done from an RF perspective. Whereas in the background, all of the necessary SAP transactions should be happening and occurring in the background unbeknownst to the user. So your RF, your UI, your UX should really fit your business processes. And so it should help dictate and should help facilitate your operational steps, not the systematic steps required in SAP. Third point, or third key consideration when evaluating or developing new RF transactions, the UI should be simple, intuitive, and beautiful, right? So you should display only the relevant and key data elements that are necessary to process the transaction, and minimize the data entry, especially with alpha characters. A lot of times, you know, depending on the hand devices or whatever, you may have to do 2 keystrokes in order to input those alpha characters. So you want to minimize, so you want to barcode as much as you can and minimize the actual physical data entry points. Excuse me. And lastly, KISS is the key to mobile transactions. You know, don't develop mobile transactions for reversals or complicated transactions. Keep them simple and help. Excuse me. So keep it simple. So we'll pause here and we're going to do a quick poll. And if you wouldn't mind taking the time to answer this question, how would you rate your company's mobile maturity? Okay. So it looks like we've got a couple people that are doing pretty good and they're cruising between furniture. And then we've got a couple of people that are have a lot of room for improvement when considering mobile maturity. Thank you everyone for participating in that poll. So in the past 20 years, I've been in and out of a lot of different warehouses and manufacturing plants, and regardless of the industry or the size, it seems that all warehouses share some very, very common goals and pain points. It seems that warehouses are constantly being asked to do more with less. They're expected to increase efficiency and speed and quality, but yet at the same time reducing costs. So the question becomes, how do you do that with very limited visibility or tools to measure kind of that health and performance of your warehouse? How do you identify bottlenecks or areas of improvement if it takes hours and hours to extrapolate or manipulate data just to kind of calculate what your picking rates or what your on-time shipment rates are? So one of the kind of the common pain points that we see is, limited visibility in the warehouse. Don't really know when, how am I doing on my routes or the truck arrivals and departures? How long has a truck been sitting at the dock door? What's my dock door capacity? What I see a lot of times in the warehouse, people that, to be able to kind of report or kind of to be able to calculate what those picking rates are, what the on-time shipment rates are. They're doing, warehouses are extrapolating that information out of SAP or BI or some system, manipulating that, whether that's an Excel or an Access database. So they're spending a lot of time extrapolating and manipulating data just to kind of be able to report on these kind of standard warehouse metrics. Which leads to kind of more of a reactive management versus proactive. So they don't have the capability to kind of foresee, and so everything becomes more reactive versus proactive. So tip 10, so our final kind of tip is, define and track your KPIs and metrics. What I've seen quite often in implementations is that that this is kind of put on, these requirements are typically put on the back burner or kind of considered phase 2 or even phase 3. And then once you go live, people are scrambling to say, well, what's this and what's that? So before implementation, really kind of sit down and think about what are those metrics, key metrics and KPIs that I need in order to run my warehouse. Out of the box, SAP offers a couple of different tool sets. So in EWM, you have the Warehouse Monitor, which is essentially kind of like a central tool for monitoring and executing your warehouse activities. So monitoring how many open work orders, how many open deliveries, warehouse tasks, so forth. The other tool set that's kind of out of the box is the Warehouse KPI Fiori app. So if you look at and I've got the screenshot here of what that Fiori app looks like. Currently right now, it's more focused on kind of operational numeric metrics and not really strategic metrics. So again, it's very similar to kind of like the Warehouse Monitor, which is available in the GUI. And it's kind of showing things like number of open warehouse tasks by activity area, process category, process type, the number of open work orders, or kind of overdue outbound delivery orders. So these are more kind of like operational to kind of keep track of what's open, what's closed, how much more work I have left in the warehouse. But they don't really provide a lot of strategic information. So one of the things that mindset that we've done is we've actually, we've developed a proprietary solution called Warehouse Wise, and it's a really highly visual real-time dashboards that provide those standard warehouse KPIs and metrics that provide, really valuable insight into your receiving and outbound logistics processes, internal warehouse operations, and most importantly, employee performance. So Warehouse Wise really enables you to kind of easily identify those bottlenecks and inefficiencies and really opportunities for improvement. As part of Warehouse Wise, we have a couple of different dashboards. We have a shipping dashboard, receiving, a kind of like a higher level warehouse manager dashboards. Those are kind of more of providing those KPIs. We also offer, as part of Warehouse Wise, we do have more kind of operational type dashboards for monitoring your routes, monitoring kitting. So if you're doing value-added services and you have like MTO, MTS, we have a really slick dashboard that kind of shows you all of that information and how well you're doing and what the productivity rates are. We also have a replenishment monitor, so you can see all your fixed bins, what your min maxes are, what your quantity levels are, and be able to initiate replenishment from there. Also, we have a dock door monitor, so to help avoid those demurrage fees and keep track of how long trucks and stuff are at the dock doors. We have a dock door monitor, which you can project on a big screen, and it shows you, and it keeps like this time clock of all your different dock doors, what deliveries are at each dock door, and how long those trucks have been there, and kind of and then how we show a percentage of how much is left to be completed. So to give you an idea of what kind of the information or those KPIs that we're providing on the shipping dashboard. So standard out of the box, we provide things like order fill rate, on-time shipment rates, perfect order rates, back order rates, some kind of key stuff is productivity rates, accuracy rates, cycle time. So how long does it take from a time an order drops till the time I get it out the door? What's my average cycle time? What's my average pick cycle time? And then also to, picking cost per line, shipping cost per line, and kind of rate of return. The nice thing with these, we give you like snippets of data. You can, this is all configurable, so you can configure your target rates. So if you have a target rate of, for example, in the upper left-hand corner, you can have a target rate for perfect order rate of 88%. We'll show you what the average monthly rate is. If it's at or above the target, it's highlighted in green. If it's below target, it's within a tolerance, it's highlighted in yellow. If not, it's red. So you can define your own target rates. You can display information by year to date, month to date, quarter to date kind of stuff. For each of these cards, you can click on each of the cards and actually drill down into into more detailed information, where you also then can do some compare and contrasts. Ultimately, you can compare and contrast between quarters, months, that kind of stuff. Ultimately, we are building in the capability to be able to compare perfect order rates between even warehouses or even regions within your enterprise. To give you a kind of an idea of what the warehouse manager dashboard, the information that's provided there is, OTIF, so on time in full. What is that rate? Inventory accuracy, turnover, days of supply, inventory to sales ratio information, things like top 20 products and units, or top 20 products based on dollar value. So those are kind of the KPIs that we provide in the warehouse monitor, or the warehouse manager dashboard. Some kind of the key benefits, of Warehouse Wise, or the goal of having this tool is to help you kind of increase your inventory accuracy, your productivity rates, on-time shipments, being able to kind of identify those bottlenecks and be able to kind of see how your warehouse is operating, and enabling you to kind of make effective change, with that comes, being able to increase your productivity rates and decreasing your cycle times and decrease your inventory carrying costs or reduce those demurrage fees. From an IT perspective, with Warehouse Wise, long gone are those days of using Access databases or Excels or, using all, countless hours of extracting and manipulating data and whatever tool set you're currently using. And then really from a human empowerment, with Warehouse Wise, we do have an employee performance components where you can measure how employees are doing, what their pick rates are. And then, it gives you a baseline to kind of start building out the framework for an employee incentive or pay for performance programs, which ultimately leads to increased employee satisfaction, retention, increased training opportunities. So it really helps the warehouse manager empower to kind of, so Warehouse Wise in general, empowers the warehouse manager to be more proactive versus reactive. Eventually we'll build into the Warehouse Wise some predictive analytics to help with that also. I'm going to stop here and I'm going to we're going to do poll question number 3. Oh, actually, we're going to stop. We're not going to do number 3. Apologize. So that's the end of our presentation. It looks like we have about 10 minutes if anybody has any questions.
Yes, Stephanie, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. A lot of back chatter on whether they can get the slides and where they can get them and where they can get the recordings. So great job as always. There was a couple of questions that came through the chat, and it's not too late. If you have questions, please feel free to add them to the chat panel or to the Q&A box. The first question I have for you is, let me read it. Is it possible to migrate from ECCWM directly to S4 embedded EWM?
No. It's kind of a yes and no. It's kind of a two-step process. So you have to first migrate your existing structure to S4, and then do that technical conversion from. So you have to migrate into S4 and then do the technical migration from WM into EWM. So technically, yes, but it's kind of like a two-step process.
Perfect. Next question.
But I will I would like to highlight, one of the things that you want to keep in mind is that when you do that, there are some ramifications from a production support system or production support and kind of like those, not necessarily migration paths, but when you move to transport paths. So one of the things that you have to kind of think about is that if you take your existing warehouse structure and you migrate it to an EC, or if you take your existing structure and you migrate it to an EWM structure, during that project phase, you still have to support, because in your production environment, it's still going to be potentially EWM, or I'm sorry, potentially still BWM, and then but in your Q or your dev and your Q environment, it's going to be an EWM. So you just got to make sure. So other things you have to take into consideration is having another migration or a transport path so that you can support your existing structure as you convert that existing structure to EWM. So those are some additional kind of considerations that you have to take. But yes, you can do it, but it's like a two-step process.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Next question. How do you control or define whether a warehouse is using basic or advanced WM.
Yep. So there is, there's not a per se a configuration setting that says I'm going to use click basic, click I'm going to use advanced. What happens is that based on your licensing, so if you haven't bought the advanced license yet, then the functionality, okay, if you haven't bought the license, then it's just base. You have all of the capabilities for basic. As soon as you start configuring the advanced stuff, you get like this little message that says this is advanced stuff and requires additional licensing. So you wouldn't be able to necessarily deploy it into production until you have that licensing agreement and it's been activated. So it's not per se a configuration setting. It's just controlled somehow in the background. I don't know all the details to that. But it does, there is a distinction. It's clear in the configuration, you know, what's basic, what's advanced. The nice thing is that, you know, because you have that ability to, so the licensing is at the warehouse level, which is nice. So you only have to buy the license for the warehouses that are going to use advanced or distributed EWM. If you have warehouses that are using basic or basic EWM or stockroom management, those don't require a additional license because those are included in the enterprise license. So there would be no additional costs associated with that. And so you would only pay the licensing fee on a warehouse by warehouse basis.
Perfect, thank you so much. I think, just double checking, I think all the rest of the questions related to where they could get the slides or see the recording. So I think that's it. I think we're there.
Great.
So thank you again, Stephanie. I think it was a fantastic presentation, as always, very detailed. I think for those of you that want more information, certainly reach out. You can reach out to me. I'm Amy Lund at Mindset Consulting, or Stephanie directly, and schedule some time with Stephanie if you're working on transforming your warehouse or your supply chain, or if you have further questions on ECC or EWM. Also, Mindset has a number of events, mostly coming up in the latter part of July. Of course, it's holiday time, but we do have some roundtables coming up, one on TM, which ties in nicely with EWM, and one on S4HANA. So if you haven't joined us for a Mindset Roundtable, they are really great online networking events that are super informative and lots of fun to connect with folks. So check out the Mindset website for information on those two upcoming sessions. I think with that, we're done. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again at a future Mindset event.
Thank you, everybody.